The insult was waiting on Marianne's plate before the soup had even been served. London, 1849, had taught the Duchess of Caldermere that cruelty in a great house rarely announced itself with raised voices. It arrived under candlelight. It wore diamonds. It bowed correctly and made certain the servants did the wounding with clean hands. At Lorne House that evening, beneath chandeliers bright enough to turn every glass into a watching eye, the butler led her past the chair that should have been hers. He did not hesitate. That was what made the moment unmistakable. A servant might confuse a guest once, perhaps even twice, but no well-trained butler in Mayfair forgot where to place a duchess. "This way, Your Grace," he said, his voice smooth with obedience to someone else's instruction. Marianne followed because the room had already begun to notice. Fans slowed. Conversations thinned. A lady near the mantel lowered her gaze too late to pretend she had not been looking. At the far end of the long mahogany table, nearly 30 feet from her husband, the butler drew back a chair. Upon the plate lay a card. Her Grace, the Duchess of Caldermere. The title remained. The respect did not. One corner had been torn, not neatly cut but pulled, as if the card had been snatched from one place and forced into another. A smear of black ink crossed the final letters of Caldermere, blurring them into a faint bruise. Marianne looked at it without touching it. For one still second, the noise of the room pressed against her from all sides, soft and eager. Then she saw Lady Beatrice Lorne sitting near Alastair in the place a wife would naturally occupy. Beatrice wore Caldermere blue. The colour was too exact to be accident. It was the deep winter shade of the old banners at Harrowden Hall, the lining of Alastair's best carriage, the ribbon that had once tied the first bouquet he had sent after their marriage. On Beatrice, beneath the gold light of her mother's dining room, it looked like a claim. "Your Grace," Beatrice called, sweetly enough for innocence and loudly enough for injury. "How kind of you to allow the seating to be arranged so comfortably." Papa insisted his Grace must be near him for political matters. Such things are so demanding, aren't they? Marianne placed one gloved hand on the back of the chair. She did not sit at once. That would have looked like obedience. She did not protest. That would have looked like desperation. She turned her face toward Beatrice and gave a small, composed smile. "Politics is often demanding," she said. "Good manners should be less so." A thin silence opened. It closed almost immediately under a nervous laugh from Lady Whitcomb, but Marianne saw the line strike home. Beatrice's expression remained lovely. Only the diamond at her ear trembled. Marianne Saturday. The chair felt too low, though it was not. The table seemed longer than any table had a right to be. At the head, Alastair Vale, Duke of Caldermere, looked up. He was not a man who missed changes in a room. His power came partly from title, partly from wealth, and partly from the unsettling stillness with which he observed other people making mistakes. Tonight, in black evening dress and a white cravat so precisely tied it appeared almost severe, he looked first at Marianne's chair, then at Beatrice, then down the length of the table to the damaged card near Marianne's plate. His expression altered by less than a breath. Most would not have seen it. Marianne did. He knew something was wrong. He did not yet know that something had been done. That distinction cut more deeply than she wished it to. Lord Lorne leaned toward him before Alastair could speak. "Caldermere, you must hear what was said at Westminster this afternoon. If we do not steady Whitcomb before the vote, the whole matter may turn tiresome." Alastair's eyes remained on Marianne for one moment longer. Then duty, habit, and political calculation drew him back. He listened to Lord Lorne. Marianne lowered her gaze to the torn card. There were many ways for a husband to fail a wife. Some were coarse enough for gossip. Some were quiet enough to be mistaken for patience. This was the quiet kind. A footman served the soup. Marianne lifted her spoon and tasted nothing. On her left, Sir Edmund Vale, one of Alastair's distant relations, murmured, "Quite a crowd tonight." One cannot expect perfect arrangements in such a crush. "No," Marianne said. "Only intentional ones." Sir Edmund blinked into his wine. On her right, Lady Whitcomb leaned closer, bracelets chiming softly at her wrist. "My dear Duchess, how fortunate you are not overly sensitive." Some ladies would be wounded by the smallest appearance of being overlooked. Marianne turned the spoon once between her fingers. Then the smallest appearance should be handled with greater care. Lady Whitcomb retreated into her soup. Across the table, Beatrice smiled down at her plate as if she had heard enough to be pleased. The first course passed with all the grace of a trial no one admitted was taking place. Lady Lorne directed the conversation with the practiced hand of a woman who had spent 20 years making social cruelty look like hospitality. She drew Beatrice into every subject that touched Caldermere interests. Charitable committees. The opera subscription. A proposed dinner for certain men with votes worth courting. Lady Beatrice has always possessed an uncommon understanding of great houses, the Marchioness said, her voice drifting over the table. Some young women are born to such obligations. Several faces turned toward Beatrice. Not toward Marianne. Marianne folded her hands in her lap beneath the edge of the table. She had spent for years learning the weight of Caldermere obligations. She had remembered the names of widowed mothers who bored Alastair, softened conversations after his silences chilled them, and kept political wives from feeling slighted when their husbands were refused favors. She had made his difficult world appear effortless. Tonight, that labor had been lifted from her shoulders and placed like a ribbon on another woman's gown. Her grace is very composed, Beatrice said, looking toward Marianne with gentle pity. I have always admired that. I don't know how she manages never to object. The room waited. Marianne felt it. Even Alastair looked up again. She did not give them anger. Anger would have given them a story to tell. Instead, she reached for the torn place card, lifted it from the plate, and set it beside her glass where the damage could be seen by anyone who cared to look closely. One learns, she said, that objection is most effective when it is saved for the proper audience. Beatrice's smile thinned. Alastair's gaze sharpened. Good. Let him see the card now. Let him see what had been done with his name, her title, and the place between them. For a moment, the distance down the table seemed to narrow. His eyes asked the question he had not yet earned the right to speak aloud. Are you hurt? Marianne looked back at him, steady and unreadable. Once, such attention from him would have warmed her. Once, the fact that he noticed would have been enough. Tonight, noticing was not protection. It was merely evidence that he had arrived late to the scene of her humiliation. Lord Lorne reclaimed him again with talk of votes and alliances. Alastair did not rise. He did not move his chair. He did not correct the room. Yet when Lord Lorne turned to address another guest, Alastair leaned slightly back and spoke without looking toward the wall where his secretary stood among the attending gentlemen. Mr. Penn. The man inclined his head. Alastair's voice was low, but Marianne had learned to read him from across crowded rooms. The original seating plan. Tonight. Mr. Penn withdrew at once. So he had noticed enough to inquire. He had not noticed enough to stand. Marianne looked down at the card under her fingertips. Its torn edge pressed against the leather of her glove, small and sharp and absurdly memorable. A foolish object. A scrap of card. A wound given a shape because the room needed plausible deniability and Beatrice needed proof that the Duchess could be moved. When the ladies rose to withdraw after the final course, no footman reached her chair quickly enough. Marianne stepped back on her own. Beatrice approached in a drift of blue silk, her face arranged into concern. I hope you were not uncomfortable, Your Grace. Mamma worries terribly over these arrangements. Important men do require such careful placement, don't they? Marianne slipped the torn card into her reticule. The motion was small. Beatrice saw it. Alastair saw it too. Marianne met Beatrice's eyes. A house reveals its mistress most clearly, she said, by where she places another woman. The words did not raise her voice. They did not need to. Beatrice's smile faltered for the first time. Marianne turned toward the drawing room with the other ladies, her shoulders straight, her reticule closed around the damaged card. Behind her, at the far end of the dining room, Alastair watched her go with recognition arriving at last. It was too late to save the evening. It was not too late to learn what his silence had cost. The drawing room of Lorne House received Marianne with the tender cruelty of women who had already decided what version of her they preferred. There were candles everywhere, enough to soften wrinkles, sharpen jewels, and turn every glance into something deniable. Lady Lorne had arranged the chairs in loose clusters near the fire, not by rank this time, but by usefulness. Beatrice was placed at the center of the largest circle before Marianne crossed the threshold. 3 young wives sat near her, one unmarried cousin hovered behind the pianoforte, and Lady Whitcomb occupied the sofa with the watchful patience of a woman who never missed a wound if it promised conversation later. Marianne entered last. She did it deliberately. A duchess did not hurry after insult. She chose the chair nearest the side table, where a porcelain lamp cast a steady light and no one could say she had hidden in shadow. Her reticule rested against her wrist. Inside it lay the torn place card, small as a calling card and heavy as proof. "You were very gracious at dinner, Your Grace," Lady Lorne said, pouring tea she had not offered Marianne first. "I have always believed true breeding is most visible when arrangements become inconvenient." Marianne accepted the cup only after Lady Lorne remembered to extend it. "Then tonight has been very instructive." Lady Whitcomb's fan paused. Beatrice's smile flickered and returned, brighter than before. She had moved closer to the hearth, where the fire caught the Caldermere blue of her gown and made it look almost black in the folds. "Mamma does worry over seating," Beatrice said. "Papa is impossible when politics occupies him. He says His Grace is the only man in London capable of turning 3 stubborn peers with one quiet sentence." "His Grace has always preferred economy of speech," Marianne said. "It is sometimes mistaken for agreement." That earned her a sharper look from Lady Lorne. Good. Marianne had no wish to be openly rude. Open rudeness would only serve them. But she refused to be decorative while they rearranged her life in front of her. The gentlemen did not join the ladies for nearly half an hour. During that time, the room built its story without saying it plainly. Beatrice spoke of a subscription for the opera that Alastair had once discussed with Marianne. Lady Lorne mentioned a charitable dinner at which the young woman with energy would be useful. Lady Whitcomb sighed over the burdens of ancient houses and glanced, with practiced softness, at Marianne's empty lap. "Of course," she said, "when a house has no nursery yet, other forms of usefulness become rather important." The sentence was not loud. It did not need to be. Marianne felt the room listen. She placed her untouched tea on its saucer. "Usefulness is an interesting standard, Lady Whitcomb. It is often invoked by those who wish a woman to justify a dignity she already possesses." A slight flush climbed Lady Whitcomb's throat. Beatrice lowered her eyes, but not before Marianne saw satisfaction there. The blow had landed where Beatrice wanted it to land, even if Marianne had answered. No heir. No public triumph. No visible claim upon Alastair that society could not question. There were marriages in London far colder than hers, but few had the misfortune of being quiet enough for another woman to speak into the silence. When the gentleman entered, the energy in the drawing-room changed at once. Lord Lorne came first, broad, genial, and overbright around the eyes. Behind him came Alastair, composed as ever, but the composure had a fault line now. His gaze found Marianne before it found Beatrice. That should not have mattered. It did. She looked away before the small comfort could become a weakness. Lord Lorne crossed to the fire and took the glass his wife handed him. "Ladies, we have survived the dullest part of government and earned something sweeter." Several people laughed. The servants moved with trays of wine and cordial. Mr. Penn was not in the room. Marianne noticed that too. Alastair had sent him after the seating plan, which meant the Duke had chosen inquiry. He had not yet chosen correction. Lady Lorne lifted her glass with charming spontaneity that had plainly been rehearsed. "Since we are gathered among those who care deeply for the stability of great houses, perhaps we might drink to the future stability of Caldermere." There it was. Smooth as cream. Poison as old as rank. Every face turned, not to Marianne, but to Beatrice, because Lady Lorne had angled her body toward her daughter. Beatrice lowered her lashes with a modesty so careful it was almost art. The glass in Marianne's hand remained untouched. Across the room, Alastair's expression hardened. "The stability of Caldermere," he said, "is not an open matter for drawing-room speculation." The room stilled. Lady Lorne's hand tightened around her glass. Lord Lorne laughed too quickly. My dear Caldermere, no speculation intended. Only admiration. A man in your position carries the weight of many expectations. So does my wife, Alastair said. The words were quiet. They were also too late. Marianne felt the room turn then, felt the little adjustment of attention as people remembered she existed because the Duke had pointed toward her. She hated that the acknowledgement helped. She hated more that it was not enough. Beatrice recovered first. Of course, she said warmly. No one admires Her Grace's composure more than I do. I only meant that some women are trained from childhood to understand public burdens. Others are blessed with a quieter nature. Marianne looked directly at her. Quiet is not the same as empty, Lady Beatrice. Beatrice's cheeks coloured. Before she could answer, Lord Lorne moved between them with a statesman's smile. Come, come. We shall have no war over compliments. Caldermere, you know my admiration for Her Grace is sincere. Still, my daughter has been bred among political rooms since she was 10 years old. A hostess learns things by listening at her mother's knee. Men like us depend upon such women more than we admit. Men like us. It was meant to flatter Alastair into alliance and remind the room that Marianne had not been born to Caldermere. She had been Lady Marianne Elwick before marriage, daughter of a respected but less powerful house, well bred enough for a duke yet not glittering enough to stop ambitious mothers from imagining alternatives. Beatrice had once been the imagined alternative. Everyone knew it. No one had been vulgar enough to say it since the wedding. Tonight, vulgarity had put on pearls. My daughter had every reason to expect a connection between our houses once, Lady Lorne said, as if continuing a harmless family recollection. Life, of course, takes unexpected turns. Marianne heard the small intake of breath from Lady Whitcomb. Alastair set his glass down. The sound was soft. The room obeyed it anyway. Marchioness, he said, I trust you do not intend to suggest that my marriage was an unexpected inconvenience. Lady Lorne smiled, but it had lost its ease. Your Grace reads severity where affection was meant. I read accurately when a sentence is placed with care. That was protection. Marianne knew it. She saw the way Beatrice's jaw tightened and Lord Lorne's confidence faltered. But the central wound remained untouched. Alastair had defended the marriage as an institution, not Marianne as the woman made to sit 30 feet from him with her title torn at the corner. He had stopped the insult that became too direct. He had not named the one everyone could pretend not to see. Lord Lorne drew Alastair aside within the room, lowering his voice but not enough to erase urgency. Marianne caught fragments. Estate income strained by repairs. A voting bloc uncertain. A loan quietly discussed. Influence needed before the month's end. There it was, beneath Beatrice's blue silk and Lady Lorne's perfect smile. Not romance alone. Not jealousy alone. Survival dressed as destiny. The Lornes needed Caldermere. Beatrice needed a place close enough to look inevitable. Marianne sat very still, and her stillness was not surrender now. It was collection. Every phrase. Every glance. Every careful use of stability instead of marriage, burden instead of wife, usefulness instead of love. At last, as the room shifted toward music, Beatrice crossed to the tea table where Lady Lorne stood half-turned from the others. Marianne did not mean to hear them. Perhaps she did. Perhaps some wounds teach the ear to sharpen. Lady Lorne's whisper reached her through the brittle notes of the pianoforte. The card was enough. She understood. Beatrice answered too softly for the words to carry, but her smile did. Marianne looked down at her reticule. The damaged card waited inside like a pulse. Across the room, Alastair was still speaking with Lord Lorne, his face cold, his attention divided between politics and the wife he had not yet crossed the room to stand beside. Marianne rose before anyone could ask her to sing, to smile, or to prove that dignity meant consent. The room noticed. This time, she let it. Marianne reached the corridor before anyone in the drawing room decided whether following her would look compassionate or merely curious. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the music became a polite blur, no louder than water behind stone. For the first time that evening, she could breathe without being watched by 20 women pretending not to count the movements of her face. The corridor outside Lady Lorne's drawing room was long, panelled in dark wood, and lined with portraits of Lorne ancestors who looked down with the satisfied expression of people who had never once been asked to justify their place at a table. Marianne walked past them slowly. Running would have made the evening into a scene. Weeping would have made it into entertainment. She did neither. At the turn near the stair, where a tall window showed the black gloss of Mayfair after rain, she stopped and opened her reticule. The torn place card lay inside against her folded handkerchief. She drew it out and held it beneath the wall sconce. Her Grace, the Duchess of Caldermere. The ink smear crossed the final letters like a shadow. A ridiculous thing, really. A scrap of card. No bruise. No broken glass. No shouted insult. Yet her fingers trembled once before she stilled them. Marianne! His voice came from behind her, low and controlled, and the sound of her name in his mouth nearly undid what the room had not. She turned before he reached her. Alastair stood several paces away, as if even now some instinct warned him not to presume nearness. The candlelight cut one side of his face into severity and left the other in shadow. He had left the drawing room quickly enough to follow her, then. Not quickly enough to stand when she had been seated wrong. Not quickly enough to stop Lady Lorne's toast. Not quickly enough to cross the room when Beatrice had smiled like a woman measuring curtains for another woman's house. But he had followed. "You should not have left alone," he said. "Should I have waited to be escorted out of my humiliation?" His jaw tightened. "That is not what I meant." "No. It rarely is." He glanced toward the card in her hand. "I have sent pen for the original seating plan. If the servants made an error, it will be corrected." Marianne looked at him for a moment, waiting for the rest. When none came, something inside her grew very quiet. If the servants made an error. His face changed. He heard it then. The poverty of the explanation. "I do not believe it was only that." Only. The word almost made her smile. There was no humor in it. "How careful you are with small words tonight." Alastair stepped closer, then stopped again. "Lord Lorne is pressing for support in the Lords. His finances are not as sound as he pretends. He and his wife are maneuvering." "Yes." "Lady Beatrice is part of that maneuvering." "Yes." "Then you know I must handle this with precision." Marianne looked down at the torn card. "You handled me with delay." Silence fell. Not the drawing-room silence, greedy and watchful. This one belonged only to them, and it was worse because it held for years. For years of breakfasts where he read letters while she remembered which aunt required a visit. For years of dinners where she warmed the cold left by his blunt refusals. For years of being praised for composure by people who benefited from it. "I saw the seating was wrong," he said at last. "I saw Beatrice at your place. I did not yet know how deliberate it was." "Did you need certainty before you could sit beside your wife?" The question struck him. She saw it enter, saw his eyes lower to the card as if the answer might be printed there. "I thought correcting it at the table would create spectacle." It was already a spectacle. Not one I wished to worsen. "You did not worsen it," she said. "You permitted it to continue politely." His breath altered. He had no ready answer for that. The Duke of Caldermere, who could chill an ambitious man with one sentence and rearrange a vote before supper, stood in a corridor unable to defend the simplest failure of the night. Marianne should have felt satisfaction. She felt only tired. She held out the place card. He did not take it at once. Perhaps he understood that accepting it was not the same as accepting a complaint. It was accepting proof. When he finally lifted it from her fingers, their gloves brushed. The contact was small. Once, such a moment would have stayed with her for an hour. Tonight, it felt like touching a locked door. Alastair stared at the torn corner, the smear of ink, the rank left legible and the dignity damaged around it. His face hardened. "Who gave this to you?" "Your hostess's butler, under your hostess's roof, at a table where your former expected bride wore your house color and sat near enough for everyone to understand the picture." "Beatrice was never my bride." "No. She was only the woman half the room remembered being prepared for the role before I arrived in it." He looked up sharply. "You are my wife." The words came with force. They might have comforted her once. Tonight, they sounded like a fact he had remembered after others had questioned it. "In law," she said. "In title." At dinner, less clearly. His hand closed slightly around the card, not enough to crush it. "Marianne, I will correct this." "You cannot correct an evening after it has taught the room what you allowed." "Allowed?" He repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. "Yes." She drew her hand back into the fold of her shawl. "That is the difficulty with quiet injuries. No one has to commit them loudly. They only require the right people to look away at the right time." The music in the drawing room changed to a livelier piece. A woman laughed on the other side of the door. The normality of it nearly broke her. They would return home tonight, if she let him escort her, and the servants would remove her cloak, and tomorrow London would call the dinner a small misunderstanding. Lady Lorne would smile. Beatrice would lower her lashes. Alastair would inquire, correct, perhaps withdraw his warmth from Lorne House in some precise and private way. And Marianne would be expected to resume her place beside him once he had decided the insult had been answered. But something in her had moved. Not broken. Moved. Away. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. It was the wrong question, though not a cruel one. That almost hurt more. "I wanted you to know before asking." He went still. She saw the exact instant understanding approached and failed to become complete. He was used to problems that could be solved by instruction. A letter sent. An alliance withdrawn. A servant dismissed. A public slight repaid in colder form. He did not yet understand that she had not come into the corridor to ask for strategy. She had come because something inside her was finished pleading to be recognized. "I can speak to Lady Lorne tonight," he said. "I can make it clear that Beatrice will not be received as an extension of Caldermere." "You can." "I can have our carriage brought at once." "You can." "I can ensure no one mistakes your position again." Marianne looked at him then, truly looked. At the man who had power enough to frighten rooms and not enough, until this moment, to ask whether his wife had grown lonely beside him. "But you cannot make this evening unhappen." His voice lowered. "No, you cannot make me unhear what Lady Lorne said." "What did she say?" "That the card was enough." "That I understood." Alastair's expression changed so violently in its restraint that for a second he looked almost unfamiliar. Anger arrived at last, clean and cold. Late anger. Late protection. Late everything. He turned as if to go back into the drawing room, but Marianne's voice stopped him. "Do not." He faced her again. "She will not insult you under my eyes and then be spared because it is inconvenient." She already did. The sentence entered the corridor. Alastair's anger faltered, not because it faded, but because it had nowhere useful to go. Marianne felt the torn place where hope had been. It was small, like the card. It was also final in a way she could not yet bear to examine. "Marianne," he said again, softer. There it was. Her name. The private one. The one he had used in carriages after long dinners, in morning rooms before the world entered, in rare moments when the Duke became simply a man with tired eyes and a wife who knew how he took his tea. She had given him that name as a kind of trust. She had not known until now that she could take it back. "You lost me, Alastair," she said quietly. He did not move. The whole house seemed to withdraw from them. Even the music beyond the door blurred into nothing. For once, his control did not save him. She saw the words reach him, saw them pass through rank, habit, pride, and arrive somewhere he had not guarded because he had never believed she would strike there. "Marianne." It was almost a plea. Almost. She stepped back. Not far. Only enough to make the distance visible. "Good night, Your Grace." His face went pale beneath the candlelight. She curtsied because etiquette was sometimes the last weapon left to a woman who refused to shatter in public. Then she turned toward the stair. He did not follow. That was wise. Or perhaps he had simply forgotten how to move. Behind her, after several long seconds, she heard the drawing room door open. His voice entered the room before she reached the landing, low enough to be controlled and cold enough to stop every conversation inside. "Lady Lorne, a word regarding my wife's seat." Marianne did not turn back. The correction had begun. The loss had already happened. By breakfast, Caldermere House knew something had changed, though no one in the household would have been vulgar enough to say so aloud. The servants moved with softer steps. Doors closed without sound. The silver on the sideboard shone as it always did, the coffee steamed in its proper pot, and the morning papers lay folded beside Alastair's plate with their columns of politics, marriages, deaths, and discreet malice. Everything appeared orderly. That was the danger of great houses. They could make ruin look well managed. Alastair entered the breakfast room at his usual hour and stopped before he reached the table. Marianne's chair was empty. Not merely unoccupied. Untouched. No cup had been set before it. No toast had been placed beneath the warmer. No folded napkin waited beside the plate she preferred. The absence had been arranged. He felt it before the footman approached. "A note, Your Grace." The salver held a single envelope. The direction was written in Marianne's hand, though not as she had once written to him in small private matters. No simple Alastair across the front. No familiar slant softened by haste. To His Grace, the Duke of Caldermere. He took it without speaking. The footman withdrew as if backing away from a closed door. Alastair broke the seal. The note was brief, elegant, and devastating in its correctness. "Her Grace thanks His Grace for the intended morning calls, but she will not accompany him today. Her Grace has decided to receive and issue her own calling card separately until further notice. Her Grace has also instructed Mrs. Vale to prepare the East Suite for her private use. Any invitations requiring her attendance may be sent to her secretary through the household office." He read it once. Then again. By the third reading, the words had ceased to be words and become furniture being carried out of a room he had not known he was standing in. Her Grace. His Grace. Not husband. Not wife. Rank speaking to rank across a distance too polite to cross. He lowered the paper slowly. "Where is Her Grace?" The butler, Havers, stood near the door with the expression of a man who had survived 3 generations of ducal displeasure by never appearing to possess opinions. "In the morning room, Your Grace. Mrs. Vale is with her." "And the East Suite?" "Being prepared, Your Grace." Alastair looked at the untouched chair. "At whose instruction?" "Her Grace's." The answer was correct. That made it worse. Marianne had not shouted. She had not summoned a carriage at dawn and fled into scandal. She had not given London a broken duchess to pity over chocolate and gossip. She had done something more difficult to fight. She had used every rule properly. She had withdrawn inside the marriage without giving society one crude handle by which to seize her. Alastair folded the note, then unfolded it again because his hand would not be still. "Send to Mr. Penn. I want him here as soon as he arrives." "Yes, Your Grace." Havers hesitated, which he almost never did. Her Grace also asked that the blue drawing-room not be opened for Lady Lorne's expected call, should one be attempted. Alastair's eyes lifted. "Lady Lorne has no call to make here." "No, Your Grace. If any card arrives from Lorne House, it is to be brought to me first." "Yes, Your Grace." The butler left. Alastair remained alone with the breakfast table and his wife's empty place. He should have gone directly to her. The impulse struck hard enough to move him one step toward the door. Then he stopped. Last night, she had said good night to the Duke, not to the man. This morning, she had written to His Grace. Every formal word had been a boundary. He had crossed many rooms in his life because rank opened them. He could not cross this one with rank. When he reached the morning room, he knocked. The pause that followed was only a few seconds long. It felt longer. "Come in," Marianne said. Her voice was calm. He entered to find her standing beside the writing desk with a neat stack of calling cards before her. Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, stood nearby with household keys, linen lists, and a face too carefully composed not to be distressed. Marianne wore pale grey, a morning gown without ornament except a narrow band of darker ribbon at the waist. She looked neither ill nor dramatic. That steadiness struck him harder than tears. "Your Grace," she said. Mrs. Vale lowered her gaze. Alastair felt the title land in the room like a dropped glass that did not break because no one was allowed to admit it had fallen. "Mrs. Vale," he said, without looking away from Marianne, "leave us." Marianne's eyes moved to the housekeeper. "Mrs. Vale, please remain by the door until I dismiss you." The housekeeper froze. Alastair went still. It was a small correction. A wife asking a servant to remain in a room where her husband had ordered the servant out. In another marriage, in another house, it might have become a quarrel. Here, it became a line drawn in daylight. Alastair inclined his head. "As her Grace wishes." Mrs. Vale remained. Marianne turned back to the cards. "I have written to Lady Augusta Merrow. She will receive me this week if I choose to go to Bath for a short stay." Bath. The word came out too cold. He softened it too late. "Is that necessary?" "No. That is why it matters." His jaw tightened. "You mean to leave Caldermere House?" "I mean to consider where my presence is useful to my own peace." "Marianne." She placed one calling card on the stack and did not look up. "Your Grace." He closed his hand once at his side, then released it. "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Address me as if I am a stranger." "I am addressing you according to rank." "You know that is not what I mean. Last night taught me that rank is sometimes the only thing society can be trusted to recognize." Her words were soft, but Mrs. Vale's face tightened at the door. Alastair lowered his voice. "If you withdraw from morning calls, if you answer invitations separately, if you move to another suite, London will think there is a rupture." Marianne finally looked at him. "London saw the rupture before you did." The sentence found the place his pride had not protected. He had no answer that would not make it worse. On the desk lay the household social calendar, open to the week ahead. Beside it, Marianne had made a second list in her own hand. The names were not random. Lady Augusta. Lady Dorothea Wren. The Countess of Marfleet, who disliked Beatrice. Two charitable patronesses who had always preferred substance to sparkle. Marianne was not hiding. She was removing herself from a stage someone else had arranged and building a room of her own. "I do not want you exposed to gossip," he said. "I was exposed to gossip at a dinner table while sitting under your name." "I know." No, her expression did not change, but her voice went quieter. "You are beginning to know. There is a difference." He took the blow because it was deserved. "What do you require?" "From you?" "Yes. Nothing I must beg for." He looked toward Mrs. Vale then, not in command but in acknowledgement of the witness Marianne had chosen. "Mrs. Vale, her Grace is to have whatever household authority she asks. The East Suite, staff, correspondence, calls, carriage, accounts. Nothing is to be delayed for my approval." The housekeeper curtsied, and for the first time that morning, something like sorrow softened her face. "Yes, Your Grace." Marianne looked down at the calling cards. "Thank you." It should have comforted him. It did not. Gratitude from her now sounded like courtesy paid to a well-behaved guest. A knock came at the open door. Mr. Penn stood in the passage with a leather folder under one arm. "Your Grace." "Forgive the interruption. The plan from Lorne House has arrived." Alastair crossed to him at once, then stopped and turned back. "Bring it here." Mr. Penn entered, bowed to Marianne, and opened the folder on the side table. The original seating draft, sent from Lady Lorne's household office yesterday afternoon. Her Grace was placed beside His Grace, as expected by rank and custom. Lady Beatrice Lorne was seated for chairs below Lord Lorne on the opposite side. He placed the paper down. The ink was crisp. The arrangement unmistakable. Marianne stood very still. Alastair felt the air leave the room. "And the altered plan?" he asked. "Not sent formally. A second-hand mark changes on a separate list used by the butler. I have requested that copy." The messenger who brought this claims a maid from Lady Beatrice's rooms carried the amended instruction shortly before dinner. Mrs. Vale made the smallest sound behind them and pressed her lips together. Marianne did not move toward the table at first. Then she crossed the room and looked down at the original plan. There it was. Her rightful place. Not imagined. Not claimed by wounded pride. Written in ink before someone decided she could be moved. Alastair watched her face and hated himself for needing paper to prove what his wife had known the moment the butler led her down the table. Marianne, he said, then stopped because the name had no permission. She looked at the paper, not at him. So I was not mistaken. No, I was not sensitive. No, I was not imagining enemies because I was embarrassed. His voice roughened. No, she lifted her eyes at last. Remember that feeling, Your Grace. It is the beginning of believing me. Then she turned back to Mrs. Vale. Please see that the East Suite is ready by luncheon. Yes, Your Grace. Alastair stood beside the proof of his wife's displacement and understood that the amended seating plan was not the only thing that had arrived too late. Alastair wrote the note 3 times before he understood that the ink was not the problem. The first version sounded like a command disguised as concern. The second sounded like a husband seeking permission to be forgiven because he had finally become uncomfortable with his own guilt. The third was brief enough to be honest. Marianne, I have received confirmation that your seat was altered after the original plan was approved. I am pursuing the matter. I know that does not repair what was done, but I wished you to hear it from me before any servant or visitor carried the tale to you. Alastair. He stared at the final word longer than all the others. His name looked strangely exposed at the bottom of the page, stripped of title, rank, and the useful armor of ducal formality. He sealed the note himself and sent it to the East Suite by a footman who had served the house long enough to look solemn without appearing curious. Then Alastair stood in his library with the rain ticking against the windows and waited like a man expecting judgment. It arrived 20 minutes later on a salver. The envelope was addressed in Marianne's hand. To His Grace, the Duke of Caldermere. No knife had ever been so clean. Alastair broke the seal. Her Grace thanks His Grace for the information regarding the seating plan. Her Grace trusts the matter will be handled with the precision His Grace gives to all public concerns. He read the letter once, then lowered it to the desk. Not Marianne. Not even Duchess. Only the smallest possible remainder of herself she could give without giving nothing. He had once believed her use of his name was an ordinary kindness of marriage, a soft domestic privilege that required no tending. Alastair, the blue account book is in the morning room. Alastair, Lady Dorothea prefers Madeira, not sherry. Alastair, you are frightening the vicar and he has not yet asked for money. He had smiled at those moments without understanding them. Now his name had become a door closed from the other side. Mr. Penn entered after a knock, carrying a narrow folder and the expression of a man who disliked what accuracy had forced him to discover. Your Grace, the stationer on Bond Street has confirmed a second set of place cards was ordered for Lorne House on the morning of the dinner. Alastair placed Marianne's reply carefully beside his blotter. By whom? The account was billed to Lorne House, but the order was collected in person by a maid attached to Lady Beatrice Lorne's rooms. The stationer remembers her because she asked whether a damaged card could be copied quickly if the ink had not dried. Alastair's eyes lifted. A damaged card. Yes, Your Grace. And the altered seating list? Still missing. The butler at Lorne House claims it was given to a junior footman for the table and not returned. Claims. Yes, Your Grace. Mr. Penn hesitated. The footman is no longer in service. The room seemed to tighten. Dismissed? The household says he left of his own accord this morning. His name is Thomas Reed. No forwarding direction was supplied. Alastair turned toward the window. Outside, the wet pavement shone beneath the grey afternoon. London was excellent at swallowing servants. A footman without references could vanish into hunger while the people who used him continued to dine beneath chandeliers. Find him, Alastair said. Quietly. Offer money if needed, but no threats. If he is frightened, I want him less frightened of us than of Lorne House. Yes, Your Grace. Another knock sounded before Mr. Penn could leave. Havers entered with a silver tray, his face arranged into the expression he reserved for unwelcome social obligations. A card and invitation from Lady Beatrice Lorne, Your Grace. Alastair did not extend his hand. Read it. The butler's eyes flickered, but he obeyed. Lady Beatrice Lorne presents her compliments to His Grace, the Duke of Caldermere, and hopes he will honour the Opera Charity Committee with his presence tomorrow evening. Lady Beatrice trusts that in these unsettled days, the committee may rely upon those who understand the public duties of great houses. The last words entered the library like perfume too sweet to be innocent. Mr. Penn looked down at his folder. Havers looked at nothing at all. Alastair held out his hand at last. Havers gave him the invitation. The paper was heavy, expensive, and faintly scented. Beatrice had written his title with perfect accuracy. She had not mentioned Marianne once. Send no reply, Alastair said. If Lady Beatrice's messenger waits, he may be informed that matters concerning Caldermere public duties are not answered through unmarried daughters of another house. Havers bowed. Very good, Your Grace. And Havers. Your Grace? Any invitation involving the Duchess's place in society comes first to Her Grace. Not to me. Not to Lady Beatrice Lorne. Not to any committee that has forgotten the difference. The butler's composure warmed by one almost invisible degree. Yes, Your Grace. When they left, Alastair remained standing with Beatrice's card in his hand. There had been a time when such a thing would have seemed merely irritating. A young woman ambitious beyond tact. A mother pressing old hopes into fresh opportunity. A father needing influence and willing to let his daughter soften the request. Now each gesture had edges. Beatrice was not reaching for him with open scandal. She was placing herself in the small spaces his negligence had left beside his wife. At 4 o'clock, Alastair went to the east corridor and stopped outside the suite Marianne had chosen. The door was closed. He had never knocked at that door before because it had never been hers. Not in the way it was now. He heard low voices inside. Marianne's, steady. Mrs. Vale's, deferential. A maid crossing the room. The small sounds of a household rearranging itself around a woman who had finally decided to occupy her own authority. He raised his hand. Then he lowered it. He had written. She had answered. She had not invited him further. Rank would have opened the door. Respect kept it closed. As he turned to leave, the door opened behind him. Marianne stood there with a folded list in her hand. She had changed into a darker gown, simple and exact, with no ornament but a small brooch at her throat. Her eyes went from his hand to his face. She understood he had been about to knock and had not. Your Grace, she said. Your Grace. He hated the symmetry of it. I received a card from Lady Beatrice regarding the Opera Charity Committee. Did you? I did not answer it. How disciplined of you. The faint edge in her voice was deserved. He accepted it. I gave instruction that invitations concerning Caldermere public duties are to be brought to you first. Because I am useful again? He looked at her fully. Because you were never absent from the position she is trying to occupy. Something moved in her expression and was gone before hope could claim it. That is well said. He nearly stepped toward her. He did not. It should have been well understood. She looked down at the list in her hand. Yes. The single word did not accuse. It did not need to. A maid appeared behind her with a tray of folded linen and stopped when she saw the Duke. Marianne moved slightly to make space, not for Alastair, but for the maid to pass. The gesture was small and unmistakable. Her suite. Her threshold. Her decision. Mr. Penn has found the stationer who supplied the second-place cards, he said. The order came through Lady Beatrice's maid. A lawn footman connected to the altered seating list has disappeared from service. Marianne's gaze sharpened. Disappeared or dismissed? That is what I intend to discover. Servants are often made to carry sins their employers prefer not to touch. I know. Do you? He deserved that too. I am learning. The answer did not ask forgiveness. That was the only reason she did not turn away at once. For a moment, rain whispered against the windows at the end of the corridor. The house felt too large around them, full of polished floors and unsaid things. Then Havers appeared below the stairs with a footman beside him, both moving too quickly to seem casual. The butler paused when he saw Marianne in the doorway. "Forgive me, Your Grace." He looked from her to Alastair, then chose correctly. "A note has arrived for Her Grace." Marianne held out her hand. The footman brought it up. No crest marked the envelope. No proper direction beyond Duchess. The word had been written with a heavy hand, as if the writer disliked granting even that much. Marianne opened it. Alastair watched her face as she read. It did not pale. It became stiller. That was worse. She passed the note to him without a word. A duchess who cannot keep her seat should not keep her husband. Alastair felt the cold thing in him sharpen into certainty. This was no longer suggestion. It was threat dressed as wit. He looked toward Marianne, ready to speak, ready to promise, ready to do all the things men did once the injury had become undeniable. She stopped him with a lifted hand. "Do not tell me you will handle it." "Then what shall I tell you?" "Tell me you understand that it began when everyone thought I would not make a scene." He folded the note once, carefully. "I understand." Marianne's eyes held his. "Not enough yet." Then she stepped back into the East Suite and closed the door, not loudly, not angrily, but with such quiet finality that Alastair stood before it for several seconds after the latch settled, holding the anonymous note like a second torn card. The anonymous note made Marianne decide upon bath before breakfast the next morning, not because she wished to run from London, but because she refused to remain in a house where every corridor had begun to feel like a place someone else might use against her. Lady Augusta Merrow's reply arrived by noon, written in a hand as severe as the woman herself. "Come at once if you require air, and later if you require reinforcements. Bring dignity. I have no patience for luggage full of tears." Marianne read it twice and placed it beside the torn place card in the small writing desk of the East Suite. There was comfort in her aunt's bluntness. It did not ask her to collapse in order to be believed. By 2 o'clock, Mrs. Vale had arranged a proper travelling companion, a maid, and a carriage for the following morning. Every step was respectable. Every instruction was correct. No one could call it flight. No one could call it rebellion. A duchess might visit a widowed aunt in Bath without inviting scandal, provided she did not look desperate while doing it. Marianne had become very skilled at not looking desperate. She was reviewing the list of gowns to be packed when a disturbance rose in the servants' passage below the east staircase. It was not loud. Caldermere House did not permit loudness except in storms and political men. But Marianne heard enough, a young woman's broken plea, Mrs. Vale's clipped anger, and Havers saying, "Not at the front door." "Have sense, girl." Marianne set down her pen. "Ask Mrs. Vale to bring the matter here," she told her maid. "Your Grace, it may be only a servant's difficulty." "Then it is already difficult enough." Minutes later, Mrs. Vale entered with a young woman in a plain brown cloak, her bonnet crushed between both hands. The girl's eyes were red, but she had made a brave attempt at composure. Marianne recognized her from Lorne House. She had stood behind Lady Beatrice during the ladies' withdrawal, carrying a shawl of Caldermere blue. "Your name?" Marianne asked gently. The girl curtsied so deeply that she nearly stumbled. "Clara Mills, Your Grace. I was in Lady Beatrice Lorne's service. I didn't know where else to go." Mrs. Vale's face was stern, but not unkind. She came to the servants' entrance asking for Her Grace. I told her it was not proper. Clara's fingers tightened on the bonnet. "They dismissed me, Your Grace. Lady Beatrice said I mishandled the cards at dinner and caused distress. She said no respectable house would take a maid who meddled with a duchess's place." The room became very still. Marianne looked at the girl, then at Mrs. Vale. "Leave us within sight, please." "Not within hearing." Mrs. Vale hesitated only long enough to obey properly. She moved to the adjoining room and left the door open. Marianne gestured toward a chair, but Clara shook her head at once. "I couldn't sit before you, Your Grace. You may stand if it steadies you. But you will not be treated like refuse in this room." Clara's mouth trembled. That kindness nearly undid her more than accusation would have done. I was told to collect a second set of place cards from the stationer, she said. Lady Beatrice gave me the money herself. She said Lady Lorne had changed the arrangement because Lord Lorne needed his Grace close for business. I did not know it would put your Grace so far away. When did you know? Clara swallowed. When I saw the card. Yours. It tore when the footman pulled it from the first place. He said we should ask for another, but Lady Beatrice said the corner didn't matter. She laughed and said, Her Grace won't make a scene. Marianne did not move. The words entered cleanly, with no need to force themselves. Her Grace would not make a scene. There it was again, the foundation upon which every insult had been built. Did Lady Lorne know? Marianne asked. Clara looked toward the open door as if fear might be waiting in the hall. Yes, your Grace. She said a woman who wished to keep her place should understand when a great house required sacrifice. I thought she meant politics. I didn't understand until the table was set. And after? Lady Beatrice told me to say it was my confusion if anyone asked. Then this morning she said I had become careless and must go. No reference. No wages beyond the week. Marianne stood. Clara took a startled step back, but Marianne only crossed to the writing desk. She wrote a short note to Lady Dorothea Wren, whose housekeeper owed Mrs. Vale a favour and whose standards were too high for Lady Beatrice's influence to penetrate. Then she rang. Mrs. Vale returned at once. Mrs. Vale, Miss Mills is to be given tea in the housekeeper's room, not the servants' hall. She will remain here until Lady Dorothea's housekeeper sends word. I will write for a place if one can be made. Clara stared as though Marianne had spoken in a foreign tongue. Your Grace, I can't ask that. You did not ask. I offered. But Lady Beatrice will say I lied. Then she will have to say it in a room where someone remembers the truth. Alistair's voice came from the doorway. Marianne had not heard him arrive. Clara turned white and sank into a curtsy so low her bonnet nearly touched the carpet. He stood just beyond the threshold, hat in hand, his expression controlled with difficulty. Forgive me, he said to Marianne. Havers told me a former lawn maid had come. I should have waited to be invited. The admission was careful. So was the fact that he did not step farther inside. Marianne saw Clara's terror and understood what power looked like from below stairs. Miss Mills was just leaving with Mrs. Vale, she said. She is under my protection until Lady Dorothea's housekeeper replies. Alistair looked at Clara, and his voice changed. It lost the ducal edge. Then under mine as well, if her Grace permits the addition. Marianne looked at him for a moment. He had not assumed. He had asked without making the question sound like charity. She permits it, she said. Clara's eyes filled. Thank you, Your Grace. Your Graces. Mrs. Vale escorted her out before gratitude could turn into sobbing. When the room was empty, Alistair remained at the threshold. Beatrice used her and discarded her? Servants are convenient places to hide guilt, Marianne said. So you told me. And did you hear me this time? Yes. The answer was immediate. He did not defend himself. He did not explain delay, evidence, politics, or caution. He simply stood with the cost of his learning on his face. Marianne turned back to her packing list because looking at him too long was dangerous. I leave for Bath in the morning. I know. You will not prevent it. No, you will not follow unless invited. His hand tightened once around his hat. No, she looked up then. You dislike that answer. I dislike deserving the question. The honesty unsettled her. She folded Lady Augusta's letter and placed it with the others. Miss Mills may be frightened into silence later. Not if she is safe enough to choose speech. Marianne studied him. Safety first. Usefulness second. Yes. A faint sound passed through him, not quite a laugh. You are giving me elementary lessons in decency, and I am grateful for them. That may be the most damning part. She nearly softened. She did not allow herself the indulgence. Gratitude is not repair. I know. Morning came pale and damp. The carriage waited before Caldermere House with Lady Augusta's crest newly fixed to the door, a visible sign that Marianne travelled under family protection as well as rank. Mrs. Vale supervised the final trunks. Clara Mills, now calmer and dressed neatly from the housekeeper's stores, stood near the servants' entrance waiting for Lady Dorothea's man to collect her. Marianne stopped before the girl. Courage does not require you to speak before you are safe. Clara curtsied. I will remember, Your Grace. Alastair came down the steps as Marianne approached the carriage. For one breath, his hand moved to assist her. Then he stopped. Lady Augusta, already inside, extended her gloved fingers through the open door. Marianne took her aunt's hand and stepped up without looking back too quickly. Only when she was seated did she turn. Alastair stood bareheaded in the damp air, his face pale with restraint. Your Grace, he said. Your Grace, she answered. The carriage rolled away from Caldermere House, carrying Marianne toward Bath and leaving Alastair on the pavement with nothing in his hands but the consequences of having learned too late. Across Mayfair, in a bedchamber hung with pale silk, Lady Beatrice Lorne stood before a looking-glass while her maid fastened a gown the exact dark blue of Caldermere banners. Not too much pearl, Beatrice said, touching the neckline. Tonight is for appearing indispensable, not eager. The maid lowered her eyes. Yes, my lady. Beatrice smiled at her own reflection. By the opera, everyone will understand what the Duchess cannot bring herself to do. Marianne returned to London for the opera because Lady Augusta had read Beatrice's triumph in the Morning Post and refused to let silence serve as a second invitation. The paragraph was brief, unsigned, and venomous in the way fashionable gossip preferred. It praised Lady Beatrice Lorne for her tireless assistance with the Opera Charity Committee during a week when certain highborn ladies had withdrawn from public duty for reasons of health and delicacy. No name had been printed. None was needed. Lady Augusta had folded the paper, struck it once against her palm, and said, "Pack the silver-grey silk. If they intend to write you absent, we shall let them watch you arrive." By evening, their carriage rolled beneath the lamps outside the Royal Italian Opera, where London had gathered in velvet, diamonds, white gloves, and appetite. Marianne stepped down with her aunt's hand at her elbow, her gown the colour of rain over pearl. Not Caldermere blue. She had chosen that refusal with care. If Beatrice wished to parade in another house's colour, Marianne would not meet her dressed as a banner in dispute. The entrance hall glittered with gold, marble, and the pale gleam of opera glasses lifted too soon. Conversations thinned as she passed. A girl near the stairs whispered, "She came after all," before her mother pressed a fan against her wrist. Lady Augusta heard it and smiled as though she had discovered a weak chess player. "Lift your chin, child," she murmured. "They have paid for their seats. Make them earn the view." Marianne almost smiled. "You are enjoying this." "I enjoy good manners used as a blade. Walk on." They entered Lady Augusta's box just before the curtain. It stood high enough to be seen, close enough to the lawn party to remove any mercy distance might have offered. Marianne sat, unfolded her fan, and looked across the curve of red velvet boxes. She saw Beatrice at once. Caldermere blue. The colour caught the candlelight and held it darkly, making Beatrice appear framed in the shade of Harrodon banners. Lady Lorne sat beside her, serene beneath feathers and diamonds. Two ladies from the Charity Committee leaned close, all concern and calculation. Beatrice turned as if drawn by a string. Her face brightened with surprise so polished it was almost insulting. She raised one hand, not high enough for vulgarity, only enough for witnesses. Around the house, opera glasses shifted. Marianne did not return the gesture. She placed her fan in her lap and looked toward the stage. "Excellent," Lady Augusta said. "Nothing unsettles malice like being treated as furniture." The orchestra began tuning below, thin notes rising in fragments. Marianne heard none of them clearly. She was watching the empty Caldermere box. Alastair was not there. His absence should have relieved her. Instead, it pressed against the evening like a question. Had he chosen not to attend? Had he received Beatrice's invitation and ignored his own instruction? Had he been delayed? Or was he, even now, being arranged by clever hands into another picture that could be printed by breakfast? A folded note arrived during the first interval. Lady Augusta accepted it from the attendant, read it once, and passed it to Marianne. The words were short. His Grace was informed Her Grace would not attend. A second note directed His Grace to the Lawn Committee box upon arrival. No signature. No crest. The paper was expensive, but not distinctive enough to accuse anyone who could afford better. Marianne felt the room sharpen around her. So, Lady Augusta said, "The trap has a door at both ends. He was told I would not come. And you were meant to see him enter her box." Marianne folded the note along its crease. She prefers pictures to proof. Most cowards do. The first act ended in applause. Guests rose, moved between boxes, and exchanged smiles sharpened by expectation. Beatrice stood at the rail of the lawn box, her blue skirts visible to half the house. She spoke to Lady Whitcomb, then glanced toward Marianne with a softness meant to resemble pity. Marianne held her gaze. She did not blink first. Then the rear door of the lawn box opened, and Alastair entered. The opera house felt it. Men did not turn openly, but their shoulders changed. Women arranged their expressions. Beatrice moved toward him with graceful relief, as if his arrival completed an image rehearsed in private. Alastair stopped just inside the box. He looked first at Beatrice's gown. Then at Lady Lorne. Then, with a precision that made the distance vanish, across the house to Marianne. She saw the note in his hand. She saw him understand. Not fully, perhaps. But enough. Beatrice said something to him, smiling. Lady Lorne gestured toward the empty chair beside her daughter. The chair was placed where everyone could see it. A man with less pride might have fled too quickly and made himself look caught. Alastair did not hurry. He bowed to Lady Lorne with such cold correctness that the gesture became an accusation. Then he turned and left the lawn box without sitting. The ripple that followed moved through the opera house beneath polite applause. It reached Marianne before he did. She heard whispers gather, falter, and hide behind fans. Alastair appeared at Lady Augusta's box a minute later. The attendant opened the door before he touched it. He entered and bowed to Lady Augusta first. "Lady Augusta." "Your Grace," she replied, in a tone that offered him no assistance. His gaze moved to Marianne. He looked tired in a way his excellent tailoring could not conceal. "I was sent a false note," he said. "I was told you had chosen not to attend." Marianne held out the note she had received. "And I was told where you were expected to be displayed." He took it. His jaw tightened as he read, but anger, though welcome, was still late. "I did not answer Lady Beatrice's invitation. I did not know she meant to make my ignorance useful." "Your ignorance has proved very useful this week." The words were quiet. Lady Augusta looked toward the stage, suddenly absorbed by an empty curtain. Alastair accepted the blow without defense. That was new. "Yes," he said. "It has." Marianne had not expected agreement. It unsettled her more than argument would have done. He extended his hand. Not dramatically. Not possessively. Only as a public offer to stand with him. From the lawn box, Beatrice watched. So did Lady Lorne. So did half of London, through opera glasses and lowered lashes. Marianne looked at his hand. Once, she would have taken it because he was her husband and because the room expected it. Once, she would have spared him the awkwardness, softened the moment, and let the world believe all was orderly. That woman had been seated at the wrong end of a table and praised for not bleeding on the cloth. Marianne did not move. Alastair's hand remained steady. His face did not. Something broke through the ducal composure, not enough for society to name, but enough for her to see. Pain. Fear. The first true knowledge that she might not help him hide from what he had permitted. She leaned closer, her voice low enough for only him and Lady Augusta. "Don't use me as proof that you've done no harm." His breath stopped. "That isn't what I want." "Then prove it by not asking me to perform forgiveness." He lowered his hand at once. No anger. No wounded pride made public. He simply stepped back, then moved to stand behind her chair, close enough for the opera house to see his choice and far enough not to claim a reconciliation she had not granted. "Then I will stand," he said softly, "until you tell me to go." The curtain rose for the second act. For several minutes, the whole opera house pretended to listen. Marianne sat with her hands folded over her fan, aware of Alastair behind her like warmth she had not invited and could not entirely ignore. Across the curve of boxes, Beatrice sat very still, her blue gown suddenly louder than her smile. By morning, the scandal sheets would not remember the aria. They would remember that the Duchess of Caldermere had returned to London, found another woman dressed in her husband's colour, and refused the Duke's hand before every eye that mattered. Marianne knew it. Alastair knew it. Beatrice knew it best of all. And when the final note of the act rose into the gold-lit air, the silence that followed no longer belonged only to Marianne. It had begun to turn. By 9 o'clock the next morning, London had already decided that a duchess refusing her husband's hand made better reading than any aria performed the night before. The scandal sheet arrived at Lady Augusta's house folded inside the ordinary papers, as if malice were no more remarkable than weather. Marianne read it beside the breakfast table while the coffee cooled untouched and rain traced silver lines down the window glass. The paragraph did not name her. It did not need to. A lady of the highest rank, long praised for composure, appeared unexpectedly at the opera last evening after a recent withdrawal from public duty. When her distinguished husband offered his hand before numerous witnesses, the gesture was declined. Society wonders whether pride, delicacy of nerves, or another influence has disturbed a once orderly ducal household. Marianne laid the paper flat. "Another influence," Lady Augusta said, taking the sheet and reading the line with open contempt. "How careful! They have tied the rope and left others to pull it. It is only ink. So is a signature on a marriage settlement. Do not underestimate ink." Marianne looked toward the fire. Last night, when Alastair lowered his hand instead of forcing the public picture into obedience, she had felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not safety. But a recognition that he had finally understood the difference between standing with her and using her as evidence of his own innocence. That fragile shift had not survived the morning untested. A footman entered with a salver. A letter for her Grace. The envelope bore no crest, but the direction was elegant. Her title was written properly, which made the thing immediately suspect. People who meant kindness did not usually disguise it so well. Marianne broke the seal. Inside lay a copied letter, not addressed to her. "To Lord Halberry," it began. "You were right to say that a separate establishment would give me air enough to breathe. His Grace sees only duty. You, at least, see the woman beneath the title. I shall not forget your kindness at the opera, nor the promise of your continued friendship when the world becomes too narrow." At the bottom sat a slanted M, almost hers if one looked quickly and wished to be convinced. The room went very quiet. Lord Halberry had spoken to Lady Augusta during the interval, no more than courtesy required. He was a widower of measured manners and good name, the very sort of man whose decency could be made into danger by someone with a clever hand and no conscience. "It is not mine," Marianne said. Her voice was calm because the shock had gone past heat into cold. Lady Augusta took the page. "No. But it is close enough for fools and enemies. Beatrice has tired of placing herself beside my husband," Marianne said. "Now she means to place another man beside me. And make you look like a woman who refused her husband's hand because she had found another one waiting." The words hung between them. The fire snapped softly. Outside, carriage wheels passed over wet paving stones, ordinary London carrying on as though a woman's name had not just been turned into a weapon. Another footman appeared before Marianne could speak. His Grace, the Duke of Caldermere. Alastair entered with his hat and gloves in one hand and the morning paper crushed in the other. He bowed to Lady Augusta, then to Marianne. He looked as if he had slept little and disliked what wakefulness had given him. "Your Grace," Lady Augusta said. "You arrive in time to admire the latest creativity." His gaze went to the letter in her hand. "I have seen a copy." Marianne stood. "A copy?" "Two were brought to Caldermere House before 8 o'clock. One to my secretary. One through the porter, as if misdelivered." "How efficient." He did not answer the bitterness. "May I see it?" Lady Augusta looked to Marianne first. That small courtesy mattered. Marianne nodded. Alastair took the page and read. His face hardened. Then the old habit returned for one fatal moment. It was slight, but she saw it. The Duke who had spent years weighing claims before feelings. The political man who treated every paper as a problem to be tested before a person to be believed. He looked at her and asked, very controlled, "Is there anything I must know?" Silence moved through the room like a door closing. Lady Augusta's hand stilled on the arm of her chair. Marianne felt the words arrive not as accusation, but as space made for one. It was enough. For one heartbeat, then two, she did not answer. She let him stand inside the question he had chosen. She let him hear how little trust there was in it. His expression changed before she spoke, but not soon enough to save him from the sound of her voice. "You have asked the wrong person," she said, "with the wrong heart." Alastair went still. The letter lowered in his hand. "Yes," he said. No defense. No explanation. Only the word, roughened by recognition. Marianne had expected denial, perhaps even injured pride. His surrender unsettled her more. "I saw the letter and allowed it to become a question for you," he continued. "It should have been an offense against you. You gave it a chair before I had one." His face tightened. Lady Augusta inhaled softly, and for once did not interrupt. "I did," he said. "I am sorry. That was my old failure wearing a different coat." Marianne looked away because the apology had found too direct a path. "Do not make poetry of it." "I will not." He placed the forged letter on the table, not near her hand, but where all three of them could see it. This was meant to do three things. Injure you. Ruin Lord Halberry's name if he defended you. And make my mistrust appear reasonable. "And did it?" she asked. He met her eyes. "For a moment, I let it. That is the part one must answer for. Truth, plainly given, could be crueler than evasion." It did not allow her the easy comfort of despising him. Alastair turned the envelope over. "The seal is wrong." Lady Augusta leaned forward. "Wrong how?" "Caldermere wax is dark blue with a black undertone. This was brightened poorly. In weak light it might pass. In daylight it is false." "You notice wax more quickly than you notice a wife misplaced at dinner," Marianne said. "Yes." The word cost him. "I intend to become better at both." She hated that the answer touched her. She kept her face still. "What will you do?" "First, Lord Halberry will be warned before gossip reaches him wearing innocence. He is not to suffer because someone required a prop." "Good." "Second, Mr. Penn has gone to the Bond Street stationer who supplied the duplicate place cards. If the paper or wax came through the same account, we will know." "No is not enough." "No. But it is where public correction begins." Lady Augusta handed the forged page back with 2 fingers. "Be careful not to turn my niece into a case to be managed, Your Grace. That is how you lost the first argument before speaking." Alastair bowed his head. "I understand." Marianne was not certain he did. Not fully. But he was listening without trying to shorten the lesson, and that was new. She moved to the small writing desk and opened the drawer where she kept the torn card wrapped in a handkerchief. Beside it lay Clara Mills's short note from the previous evening, thanking her Grace for the place being arranged with Lady Dorothy as housekeeper. Marianne took up Clara's note, then paused. Trust had become a locked room. She could not open it all at once. She looked at Alastair. The maid Beatrice dismissed as a name. Clara Mills. She said Lady Beatrice ordered the duplicate cards. She also said Lady Lorne knew. His attention sharpened. Will she speak? Not until she is safe. Then she will be safe first. He did not say useful first. He did not say necessary first. Marianne noticed. She wished she had not. A knock interrupted them, and Mr. Penn entered only after Lady Augusta's footman announced him. He looked rain-damp and satisfied in the grim manner of a careful man proved correct. "Your Grace." The stationer confirms the wax and paper were purchased 2 days ago by a servant in Lorne livery. Not the same maid. A man. Alastair's hand closed around the back of a chair. The missing footman. Very likely, Your Grace. Thomas Reed. The pieces settled on the table. Torn card. Wrong note. Blue gown. Forged letter. Missing servant. Marianne felt the pattern become too clear to dismiss and too ugly to ignore. Beatrice was not improvising cruelty. She was composing a character for Marianne, one object at a time. Displaced wife. Fragile wife. Proud wife. Possibly disloyal wife. She is building a story, Marianne said. Alastair looked at her, and this time he understood without needing the room to explain. Then we will build the truth. No, Marianne said. We will uncover it. Truth does not need invention. He accepted the correction. You are right. When he left to warn Lord Halberry and follow the stationer's trail, he paused at the door. Marianne. She did not answer to the name, but she did not forbid it either. That seemed to strike him harder than anger would have done. I should have believed you first, he said. Before paper. Before whispers. Before any room in London. Then he was gone, carrying the forged letter with a care usually reserved for fragile things. Marianne remained beside the desk, one hand resting near Clara's note, the other near the folded scandal sheet. The morning had not healed anything. It had done something more dangerous for Lady Beatrice Lorne. It had taught the Duke where the lie began, and it had taught Marianne that his regret, however late, had finally learned to move. By late afternoon, Lady Augusta's drawing-room had become a court without judge, bench, or mercy for anyone who mistook silence for weakness. The rain had stopped, leaving the windows filmed with grey light, and on the rosewood table near the hearth lay the small objects that had begun to speak more clearly than people had. The torn place card rested beside the original seating plan. The anonymous note lay beneath the opera message that had directed Alastair to the Lorne box. The forged letter to Lord Halberry sat apart, as if even paper disliked being placed near its own lie. Marianne stood by the mantel with one hand resting lightly on the stone, watching Mr. Penn arrange the documents with the care of a man who understood that in London a scrap of stationery could wound almost as thoroughly as a weapon, if placed in the proper room. Alastair did not sit. He had not sat since arriving. He stood across from her, near enough to be present, far enough not to claim comfort. That distance had become its own language between them. Lady Augusta occupied the largest chair by the fire, her cane across her lap like a magistrate's staff, though she had never needed wood or title to intimidate fools. Proceed, Mr. Penn, she said. Slowly enough for truth, not so slowly that I age further. Mr. Penn bowed. The Bond Street stationer has confirmed 3 purchases connected to Lorne House within 4 days. First, the duplicate place cards, collected by Clara Mills under Lady Beatrice Lorne's instruction. Second, blue wax and paper resembling the Caldermere household style, collected by a male servant in Lorne livery. Third, a small packet of blank notes, suitable for informal messages. The man was almost certainly Thomas Reed, the footman no longer in Lorne service. Marianne looked at the forged letter. Almost certainly is not enough for public correction. No, Your Grace, Mr. Penn said. But Miss Mills is here. A pause moved through the room. Marianne turned toward the door. Clara Mills had been brought from Lady Dorothea Wren's household in a plain but neat gown, her hair properly pinned, her hands folded so tightly that the knuckles looked pale. She did not appear less frightened than before. She appeared better protected. That difference mattered. Bring her in, Marianne said. Alastair looked at her first, not the door. Only if you wish it. I do. Then she speaks to you, not to me. The words were quiet, but Lady Augusta heard them. Her eyes flicked toward him with the first sign of reluctant approval she had permitted since the affair began. Clara entered and curtsied to Marianne. Your Grace. You are safe in this room, Marianne said. Safe does not mean nothing frightening will be asked. It means no one here will punish you for answering truthfully. Clara swallowed. Yes, Your Grace. Alastair remained still, hands behind his back, his authority deliberately leashed. Tell me what Lady Beatrice asked of you, Marianne said. Clara kept her eyes on Marianne's gown, as if looking higher required too much courage. She gave me money the morning of the dinner and told me to collect another set of place cards from the stationer. She said Lady Lorne had changed the arrangement because Lord Lorne needed his grace close for political matters. When the Duchess's card tore, the footman said we should ask for another. Lady Beatrice said it didn't matter. Her voice faltered. She said, Her Grace won't make a scene. Marianne felt the phrase strike the room again, but this time it did not leave her alone with the blow. Lady Augusta's mouth tightened. Mr. Penn looked down. Alastair's face changed with an anger so contained it had become almost pale. Did Lady Lorne know the altered seating placed Lady Beatrice beside his Grace? Marianne asked. Clara nodded. Yes, Your Grace. I heard her say that great houses require practical women, not sentimental ones. She said Lady Beatrice had been raised for obligations the Duchess seemed content to neglect. And after the dinner, Lady Beatrice told me if anyone asked, I was to say I had confused the cards. Then when His Grace began asking questions, I was dismissed. No reference. Clara looked up then, terrified but determined. I know I should have spoken sooner. Marianne crossed the space between them before Clara could retreat into shame. You were dependent upon people who used that dependence against you. That is not the same as guilt. Clara's eyes filled. Alastair spoke to Mr. Penn without taking his gaze from the girl. Miss Mills's position with Lady Dorothea is to be secured under Her Grace's recommendation and mine. No whisper from Lorne House is to touch her wages, reference, or future placement. Yes, Your Grace. Clara curtsied again, and this time her knees did not tremble as deeply. When she left, the room remained full of her truth. Marianne returned to the mantel. The cards and letters on the table no longer looked like evidence alone. They looked like little doors through which frightened people had been forced to carry another woman's ambition. Alastair looked at the torn place card for a long moment. I treated your silence as convenience. Marianne lifted her eyes. The sentence was almost right, and because it was almost right, it required correction. No, she said. The word was soft. It stopped him. You treated it as consent. Alastair did not answer at once. That was how she knew he had heard her. Not the sound. The meaning. Yes, he said finally. I did. When I did not complain, you believed I was content. When I did not ask for your attention, you believed I had no need of it. When I made rooms easier for you to endure, you thought the rooms had become easier by themselves. Her voice did not rise. It did not have to. I was not quiet because nothing hurt me. I was quiet because I had learned that my pain disturbed the peace you preferred. Lady Augusta looked into the fire. Mr. Penn became fascinated by the clasp of his notebook. Alastair stood under the sentence like a man who had chosen not to step out of rain. I do not know how to defend myself against that, he said. You are not being asked to defend yourself. No, he looked at her then, with the painful honesty of someone who had reached the end of usefulness. I am being asked to understand. Marianne felt the answer enter a place she had tried to close. She did not forgive him for finding the right word. She only recognized that he had found it. A footman entered with a salver and a gilt-edged card. Lady Augusta took it, read one line, and gave a short laugh without amusement. Lorne House has grown sentimental. They wish to restore civility. Marianne accepted the card. The Marchioness of Lorne requested the pleasure of Lady Marianne's company at an intimate gathering arranged among friends to correct misunderstandings. Lady Marianne. Not Her Grace. Not Duchess of Caldermere. Her girlhood style, stripped of her rank as if marriage, position, and injury could all be erased by a secretary's pen. Alastair saw the address. His expression turned cold. They have made their last mistake. No, Marianne said. She placed the card beside the torn place card. One had moved her seat. The other had moved her name. They have made their clearest one. Lady Augusta leaned back. Will you answer? Marianne touched the edge of the invitation. Yes. Alastair waited. He did not step ahead of her. He did not tell her what he would do. He simply waited as if her decision would govern the room. That, too, she noticed. "I will attend," she said. "Not as Lady Marianne." "No," Alastair said quietly. "As the Duchess." She looked at him. "Not to be rescued from embarrassment." "No, and not to have you speak over me." "No, and not to become the background for your apology." Pain crossed his face, but he bowed his head. "No." Marianne gathered the invitation and placed it on top of the torn card. The paper was light. The meaning was not. "Then let them invite Lady Marianne," she said. "The Duchess will answer." Lady Beatrice Lorne had chosen the conservatory because glass could make a lie appear almost honest. By the time Marianne arrived at Lorne House that evening, every lamp along the entrance had been lit, and the long windows glowed through the mist like panes of polished amber. It was not a large gathering, though Lady Lorne had called it intimate as if intimacy were a virtue rather than a tactic. There were enough witnesses to injure a reputation, not enough to make the injury look deliberate. Lady Augusta stepped from the carriage first, severe in plum silk, her black lace shawl drawn close against the damp. Marianne followed without accepting the footman's hand until he had addressed her properly. "Your Grace," he said, and only then did she descend. Alastair arrived in the second carriage with Lady Dorothea Wren, whose white hair, diamond brooch, and pitiless memory made her one of the few women in London no ambitious hostess wished to offend. Mr. Penn came as well, not as a guest, but as a discreet gentleman attached to a duke who had finally learned that truth required witnesses before society agreed to hear it. Alastair did not offer Marianne his arm at once. He looked at her first. The question was silent. The choice was hers. Marianne gave the smallest nod, and only then did he step close enough for propriety, not possession. The difference steadied her more than she wished to admit. Inside, the drawing-room had been arranged with lawn precision. Lady Lorne stood near the mantel, smiling as if the previous insults had been regrettable weather. Lord Lorne hovered close to a pair of political gentlemen. Lady Whitcomb watched with a hunger she tried to disguise behind a painted fan. Beatrice stood in ivory silk rather than blue. She had surrendered Caldermere's colour, but not the habit of arranging herself where she might be seen. "Your Grace," Lady Lorne said, curtsying with exact correctness. "How relieved we are that you accepted our little invitation. Misunderstandings grow so tiresome when allowed to breathe." "Then we shall not let them breathe long," Marianne said. A faint pause followed. Lady Dorothea's mouth twitched. Beatrice moved forward, gentle as a candle flame before it burns. "I am glad you came. I feared you might feel uneasy after so many unfortunate interpretations." "I felt curious," Marianne said. "That is less delicate." Beatrice's smile held, but her eye shifted once toward the side door near the fern stands. Marianne noticed. Alastair noticed too. The old Alastair would have crossed the room immediately, closed the door, and frozen every man present into obedience. This Alastair remained still. His attention sharpened, but he waited. Marianne followed Beatrice's glance and saw Lord Halberry beyond the threshold of the adjoining passage, speaking quietly with a footman. He looked puzzled, not guilty. His hat was in his hand, and his expression held the uneasy courtesy of a gentleman who had arrived expecting one kind of errand and found himself placed in another. Marianne understood the shape of the trap before Beatrice spoke. "The conservatory is cooler," Beatrice said. "Perhaps Her Grace would like a little air before we attempt conversation. Lord Halberry has just arrived to discuss Lady Augusta's charitable request." "How fortunate." Lady Augusta's brows rose. "My charitable request has become more active than I am." Lady Lorne gave a light laugh. "Perhaps there has been confusion." "Confusion appears to be the most industrious servant in this house," Lady Dorothea said. A few guests looked away too quickly. Beatrice coloured, but only slightly. "I only thought Her Grace might prefer privacy. These matters can be painful." Marianne turned toward the conservatory door. Through the glass, the lamps made the plants cast long shadows, and the polished floor reflected them like dark water. A woman seen there with Lord Halberry would need no impropriety to be injured. Distance would do it. Glass would do it. A whisper would finish the work before midnight. She walked toward the door. Alastair moved at the same moment, then stopped himself. Marianne felt the restraint like a held breath behind her. He wanted to prevent the danger. Instead, he allowed her to name it. At the threshold, Marianne looked at Lord Halberry. "My lord, I believe you have been invited here under false pretenses." Relief crossed his face so quickly it became almost pain. "Your Grace, I received a note in Lady Augusta's name asking me to speak privately about a subscription for the Widow's Fund. I thought it odd, but I did not wish to appear negligent." Lady Augusta tapped her cane once. "I sent no note. Had I wished money, Lord Halberry, I would have asked you loudly and in company." The room stirred. Beatrice gave a soft laugh. "How strange. Notes seem to go astray whenever her Grace is distressed." Marianne turned to her. "No. They go astray whenever you require a picture to replace the truth." Beatrice's smile vanished for a heartbeat. "I don't know what you mean. You wanted me in that conservatory with Lord Halberry. Not because the air is cooler. Because a forged letter did not ruin me quickly enough, and now you require living proof for a lie already written." Lady Lorne stepped forward. "This is intolerable." "It is," Marianne said. "But not for the reason you mean." Alastair moved then, not to stand before Marianne, but to bring Lady Augusta and Lady Dorothea to the threshold where they could see Lord Halberry, the passage, the footman, and the open conservatory door. "No one will speak later of what was not witnessed now," he said. His voice carried through the room, calm enough to be dangerous. "Lord Halberry arrived by a false note. Lady Augusta did not send it. Lady Dorothea has heard his account. Her Grace has not been alone with him." Beatrice looked to Alastair then, as if rank might still rescue her from the woman she had underestimated. "Your Grace, surely you see grief has made your wife suspicious." "I don't blame her. Truly, I don't. A neglected heart can imagine enemies everywhere." The words landed with perfect cruelty. They offered pity and accusation in the same breath. Marianne felt Alastair's anger gather, but he did not speak over her. That was his test. She heard him pass it in silence. "My heart was neglected," Marianne said. The room froze at the plainness of it. Beatrice's lips parted, almost victorious. Marianne continued before that victory could form. "But you did not approach the wound with compassion. You approached it as an opening." Lady Dorothea's fan snapped shut. "Well said." Beatrice's face tightened. "I have only ever tried to help his Grace." "By moving my seat?" Marianne asked. "By wearing his house colour at the opera? By sending him a false note? By placing Lord Halberry's name in a letter I did not write? By inviting me here under my girlhood style and offering me a glass room in which to be misunderstood?" Each question was quiet. Each one gave the room less space to pretend. Lord Lorne's genial mask had begun to fail. Lady Lorne stared at her daughter with something too cold to be surprise. Beatrice took one step back. "You cannot prove any of that." "Not here," Marianne said. "Not tonight." Beatrice's chin lifted. "Then perhaps accusations should wait." "They will." Marianne turned toward Lady Lorne. "Tomorrow evening at Caldermere House. Bring your confidence, your daughter, and whichever version of civility you wish to defend." Lord Lorne bristled. "Caldermere, you cannot mean to turn private confusion into a public reckoning." Alastair looked at him. "Private confusion did not seat my wife at the wrong end of your table. Private confusion did not dress your daughter in Caldermere blue. Private confusion did not forge letters, misdirect notes, or summon Lord Halberry into a conservatory." "This is madness," Beatrice whispered. Marianne faced her one final time. "No. It is precision. That is why you are frightened." The words did not need volume. They took the room because they were true. Marianne turned away before triumph could tempt her into cruelty. Lady Augusta joined her. Lady Dorothea followed with the satisfaction of a woman who had seen society corrected without anyone overturning a chair. In the hall, beyond the drawing-room's listening breath, Alastair stopped several feet from Marianne. He did not reach for her. He did not apologize where servants might hear and turn pain into anecdote. You should not have had to do that alone, he said. Marianne looked back toward the closed door. I was not alone. His expression changed carefully. No, but I was the one she tried to make silent. Yes. She turned to him fully. Candlelight from the hall fell across his face, showing the fatigue beneath his control and the fear beneath the fatigue. Tomorrow, when the papers are on the table, when Lady Lorne tries to soften what she did, when Beatrice looks to you because she thinks your rank matters more than my voice, remember this. He did not move. I will. Do not defend me by making me silent again. His answer came without grandeur. I won't. The contraction, so unlike his formal armor, made the promise feel human enough to hurt. Marianne held his gaze for one breath longer. Then tomorrow, she said, I will take my own place. Marianne entered Caldermere House the next morning through the front door, not the side entrance she had used when returning from calls in easier years. Havers opened it himself and bowed so deeply that no one in the hall could mistake the honor. Your Grace. The words carried down the marble passage with a quiet force that made two footmen straighten and Mrs. Vale lower her head. Marianne paused on the threshold. She had lived in this house for 4 years, yet that morning it felt less like returning than appearing before a place that had finally been instructed to see her. Lady Augusta stood at her side, black cane in hand and satisfaction tucked behind a severe mouth. Good, she murmured. A house with sense can still be taught. Marianne did not smile, though the words steadied her. Alastair waited in the front drawing-room rather than the library. That mattered. The library was his domain, filled with ledgers, dispatch boxes, and the masculine silence of decisions made before women were informed. The drawing-room was shared ground, pale with morning light and stripped of ornament except for a writing table, several chairs, and a blue ribbon packet resting unopened near the hearth. He bowed when she entered, not as a husband greeting a wife he assumed would forgive him, but as a man receiving a woman whose choice he had no right to command. Your Grace. Your Grace, Marianne answered. The old pain moved between them, familiar now, but not unchanged. Beside the mantel stood Dowager Lady Vale, Alastair's mother, elegant in dark violet, her silver hair pinned beneath a lace cap, her eyes as clear and unsparing as winter. Marianne had expected coldness from her. Instead, the older woman curtsied. Duchess. Lady Augusta looked at her sharply. You came. I was asked, the Dowager said. And I have lived long enough to know that when a woman is asked to witness truth, refusal is usually cowardice dressed as delicacy. Lady Augusta gave the smallest approving sniff. 2 gentlemen stood near the far window, both elderly enough to have outlived flattery. Alastair introduced them as Sir James Alibi and Mr. Fenton, trustees connected to Marianne's marriage settlement and household provisions. Marianne felt her attention sharpen. Alastair saw it and spoke before suspicion could become insult. This is not a court, and it is not a bargain. I have not brought them to purchase peace. Then why are they here? She asked. Because apology without freedom is another form of pressure. The room grew still. He looked tired, but not theatrically so. His exhaustion had become plain, useful, almost humble. If you attend tonight's gathering, you should do so knowing that your safety does not depend upon whether you ever choose to forgive me. Sir James stepped forward, opened the packet, and presented a short summary in careful language. He did not drown the room in legal phrases. He said enough. Marianne would have independent access to her personal income. The accounts for her charities and private household needs would not require Alastair's daily approval. If she chose to reside for a time at Harrowden Hall, she would hold authority over its domestic establishment. If she preferred Bath under Lady Augusta's roof, suitable servants, carriage expenses, and correspondence protections would be arranged without interference. If she remained at Caldermere House, the East Suite and her social calendar remained hers to govern. No one would tell society she had withdrawn from duty because of nerves. No one would make her return before she chose it. When Sir James finished, the ticking clock sounded too loud. Marianne looked at Alastair. You arranged all this since last night. Some of it existed in fragments and was neglected because I did not ask what security meant to you. Some required instruction this morning. None requires gratitude. You expect none. I hope for none. Gratitude can become another chain when a woman is tired. Lady Augusta's eyes narrowed. That is the first sensible thing I have heard from a duke before noon. The dowager turned slightly toward Marianne. My late husband admired silence above nearly every virtue. He called it discipline when it was often fear, and good breeding when it was loneliness. I taught my son too much of that house. Alastair's face shifted, but he did not interrupt. The dowager continued, each word measured. You were praised in this family for making difficulty invisible. That praise should have warned us. Instead, we were comfortable. Marianne felt the unexpected sting of it. Not because the dowager had excused herself. She had not. Because truth from an older woman in the House of Vale reached places Alastair's remorse could not. Comfortable people rarely ask who is paying for the quiet, Marianne said. No, the dowager replied. They do not. Alastair looked at his mother, then back to Marianne. I was proud of having a peaceful marriage. His voice held no ornament. I thought absence of complaint meant I had not failed you. I thought your steadiness was proof of contentment. I let the room benefit from your restraint and then wondered why you had nothing left to give me when I finally noticed the cost. Marianne stood beside the chair but did not sit. Sitting would have made the conversation feel settled. It was not settled. If I go to Bath, she asked, then I will send no carriage after you. If I go to Harrowden Hall, then the household receives you as its mistress, and I do not arrive without permission. If I stay in this house, then I knock. I ask. I remember that a wife is not a room attached to a title. The answer was quiet enough that only the room could hold it. Marianne looked away first. Outside, a carriage passed, wheels rolling over the street with ordinary indifference. She thought of Lorne House and the card with its torn corner. She thought of Beatrice in blue silk, of Clara Mills trembling with a crushed bonnet, of Lord Halberry nearly made into a stain on her name. She thought of the anonymous note, ugly in its confidence that a woman who did not make a scene could be erased one gesture at a time. This does not restore trust, she said. No, it does not make tonight easier. No, and it does not give you the right to speak for me in that room. His gaze held hers. I know. Lady Augusta shifted in her chair. Do you? Men often think they know a thing until the room turns hostile. Then they discover a sudden need to be magnificent. Alastair bowed his head toward her. If I forget, you may correct me. I assure you, I won't wait for permission. For the first time, something almost like warmth passed through the room, brief and fragile. Marianne crossed to the table where the papers lay. Beside the packet, Alastair had placed the objects from Lady Augusta's drawing room, the torn place card, the wrong opera note, the forged letter, the wrong title invitation. He had not hidden them in a folder. He had laid them where their ugliness could not be softened. Marianne touched the place card. The torn edge no longer surprised her finger. She knew its shape now. They tried to put me at the end of a table, she said. Then out of my own name. Then into another man's shadow. Each time, they depended on my silence. Alastair did not move. Yes. Tonight is not for your honor. No, not for Caldermere pride. No, not even for our marriage. That one hurt him. She saw it, and he let her see it. Then what is it for? He asked. Marianne lifted the torn card from the table. It looked smaller in morning light, almost absurdly small for the ruin it had begun. Yet a needle was small too, and could still draw blood. For the woman they thought would not make a scene. Lady Augusta stood. At last. The dowager's eyes shone faintly, though her posture remained composed. Alastair looked at the card in Marianne's hand with an expression she could not entirely read. Regret was there. Anger too. But beneath them lay something quieter, more difficult. Respect without demand. Marianne turned toward the door. Send the invitations for tonight as planned. Lady Lorne wanted witnesses. She shall have them. Alastair bowed. As her grace wishes. The title did not wound her that time. It stood where it should have stood all along, not between them as a wall, but around her as a boundary. Marianne closed her hand lightly around the torn place card. Then let them see where they tried to put me. By 8 o'clock that evening, Caldermere House had become the one place in London where no one could pretend not to understand why they had been invited. The front drawing-room was lit without extravagance, its lamps turned high enough to deny shadow and low enough to spare no face. Marianne had chosen the arrangement herself. No long dining table. No distant end where a woman might be placed and then politely forgotten. Chairs formed a measured half-circle around a rosewood table, and on that table lay every small object that had tried to make her smaller: the torn place card, the wrong title invitation, the false opera note, the forged letter, and the stationer's written confirmation tied with narrow black ribbon. Lady Augusta sat to Marianne's left. Dowager Lady Vale sat to her right, upright and silent. Lady Dorothea Wren held her fan closed across her lap like a verdict. Lord Halberry stood near the mantel, pale but steady. Clara Mills waited beside Mrs. Vale in the rear of the room, dressed plainly and placed where she could be seen without being displayed. Alastair stood near the table, not at its head. There was no head. That, too, had been Marianne's decision. When Havers announced Lord and Lady Lorne with Lady Beatrice, the air altered, but no one rose too quickly. Lady Lorne entered first in mauve silk and wounded dignity. Lord Lorne followed with the heavy geniality of a man still hoping rank might smooth consequence into inconvenience. Beatrice came last, dressed in pale green. Not Caldermere blue. Marianne noticed and did not reward the surrender with a glance. "Your Grace," Lady Lorne said, curtsying to Alastair before turning with delayed precision to Marianne. "Your Grace. I trust this distressing business may at last be put into proportion." Marianne looked at the table. "That is why we are here." Lady Lorne's smile tightened. "I fear an excess of feeling has made ordinary mistakes seem rather sinister." Lady Augusta gave a dry sound. "Ordinary mistakes rarely require this much choreography." Lord Lorne cleared his throat. "Caldermere, surely we may speak as friends." Alastair did not look away from Marianne. "Her Grace will begin." The room stilled. Beatrice's eyes moved to him, quick and disbelieving. She had expected his anger. She had not expected his restraint. Marianne stepped to the rosewood table and picked up the torn place card. It looked almost harmless between her gloved fingers. "This was placed at my setting in your house," she said to Lady Lorne. "My title was written correctly, then damaged and moved. At dinner, I sat far from my husband while your daughter sat where a duchess would naturally sit." Lady Lorne lifted her chin. "A seat in confusion, regrettable perhaps, but hardly a conspiracy." "No," Marianne said. "Not by itself. By itself, it was only a lesson. It taught the room that I could be displaced if everyone remained graceful enough." Beatrice folded her hands. "No one wished you displaced. I'm sorry if you felt that way." Marianne turned to her. "Do not apologize for my perception when your conduct is on the table." The room absorbed the sentence with a small, collective silence. Marianne placed the card down and lifted the gilt invitation. Then came this. An invitation to restore civility, addressed to Lady Marianne. Not to her Grace. Not to the Duchess of Caldermere. My girlhood name was used as if my present place could be rubbed away by ink. Lady Dorothea opened her fan halfway. "I have known secretaries to be dull. I have never known one to accidentally demote a duchess in gold-edged script." A faint color rose in Lady Lorne's face. "My secretary may have erred." "Your secretary did not send a false note to the opera," Marianne said. She laid the opera message beside the invitation. "His Grace was told I would not attend and was directed to your committee box. I was informed where he would be seen. Your daughter appeared in Caldermere blue, beside an empty chair placed for public viewing." Beatrice's softness vanished for 1 second. "The gown was a color, nothing more. A color chosen after you had already used my chair." Beatrice looked toward Alastair again, but he did not rescue her from the silence. Marianne then touched the forged letter. When that failed to make the desired picture, a letter appeared. It used my initial and Lord Halberry's name. It suggested I wished for a separate establishment because another man saw the woman beneath the title. Lord Halberry stepped forward. "I received no such letter from her Grace. Nor did I offer such language. I was later summoned to Lorne House by a note falsely sent in Lady Augusta's name. Lady Augusta raised one brow. Had I written to Lord Halbury for funds, I would have done it honestly and with less poetry. A murmur moved and died. Lady Lorne's face had lost its warmth. Lord Lorne looked toward his daughter. Beatrice's hands were no longer folded. They were clasped. Alastair moved at last, but only one step, and only after Marianne's gaze allowed it. The stationer on Bond Street confirms the duplicate cards were ordered through Lorne House and collected under Lady Beatrice's instruction. The wax and paper used for the forged letter were purchased by a servant in Lorne livery. Clara Mills can speak to the first matter. Clara trembled but did not retreat. Marianne turned to her. Miss Mills, only what you know. Clara curtsied. Lady Beatrice sent me for the second cards, Your Grace. When the Duchess's card tore, she said it didn't matter. She said, Her Grace won't make a scene. Lady Lorne knew the places had been changed. I was told to take blame if anyone asked. Beatrice made a strangled sound. You ungrateful girl. Alastair's voice cut in, quiet and cold. Careful. Clara lowered her eyes, but she remained upright. Marianne looked at Beatrice. That is the first honest thing you have said tonight. You did expect gratitude from someone whose dependence you used. Lady Lorne stood too quickly. This is outrageous. A dismissed maid, scraps of paper, and a wounded wife's imagination cannot be allowed to ruin a young woman. Marianne faced her fully. My marriage has been wounded. That part is true. But your daughter did not find that wound with pity. She found it as an opening. Beatrice's control cracked. I only wish to help His Grace. Everyone knows he needs a woman who understands the obligations of his house. You sat in silence for years and expected silence to be devotion. I would have served Caldermere better. The words rang in the room, naked at last. Lady Lorne closed her eyes. Lord Lorne seemed to shrink inside his evening coat. Alastair looked at Beatrice with a contempt so complete it needed no volume. You did not understand my house, he said. You understood my failure. There is a difference. Beatrice's mouth trembled. Your Grace, I didn't mean to hurt you. You meant to hurt my wife. He turned then, not toward Beatrice, but toward the room. And I gave that cruelty room to work. I failed Her Grace before witnesses. I saw enough at Lorne House to know she had been insulted, and I chose caution when I should have chosen her. I mistook her restraint for ease and her silence for consent. Later is the refuge of men who believe women will continue bleeding politely until we are ready to look. I correct it before witnesses because I failed before witnesses. Marianne felt the words strike places in her that had refused comfort for days. They did not heal everything. They did not ask to. That was why they mattered. Alastair looked at Lord Lorne. House of Vale withdraws its support from any political matter advanced through your influence. You will not use my name, my house, or my marriage to repair your debts. Lady Lorne will not be received at Caldermere House. Lady Beatrice will not be received in any room where Her Grace's dignity is expected to yield to her ambition. Any house that chooses to treat Lady Beatrice as injured innocence will do so without Caldermere friendship. Lord Lorne's face darkened, then emptied as calculation found no purchase. Lady Lorne's social power collapsed in silence, which was the way she had preferred to spend it. Beatrice stared at Marianne as if she had not known the woman at the far end of the table could bring a room to this. Marianne picked up the torn place card one final time. You were right about one thing, she said. I did understand. Beatrice flinched. I understood that you believed I would rather suffer politely than make you answer for it. That was your mistake. No one spoke. Then Lady Dorothea rose and curtsied to Marianne with deliberate depth. Your Grace. Lord Halbury followed. Your Grace. One by one, the others did the same. Not loudly. Not theatrically. Correctly. The correction moved through the room like a bell heard after long fog. When the Lornes left, they did not sweep out. They departed under the weight of every gaze they had once hoped to turn upon Marianne. The room emptied slowly after that, until only Marianne and Alastair remained near the table. The objects lay between them, spent but not erased. Alastair bowed his head. "Your Grace." It was not a wall this time. It was an offering placed at the proper distance. Marianne touched the torn card, then let it rest. "Your Grace," she answered. His face tightened, but he did not ask for more. Outside, the carriage wheels of departing guests faded into Mayfair night, and for the first time since Lorne House, Marianne felt no need to prove she had been wounded. She had been seen. 3 weeks after the Lornes left Caldermere House without one friendly carriage stopping for them, Marianne arrived at Harrowden Hall beneath a sky washed clean by morning rain. Derbyshire opened around the carriage in long green slopes, stone walls, and wind moving through fields that seemed to breathe more honestly than London drawing rooms ever had. The house rose ahead in grey towers and broad windows, old, severe, and waiting. She had seen it before, of course. She had come as Alastair's new Duchess years earlier, received with ceremony, guided through rooms, shown portraits, keys, linen books, and obligations. That first arrival had felt like being measured for a life already cut. This one felt different. The carriage stopped before the front steps, and no one hurried her. That was the first kindness. The second was Mrs. Vale standing with the housekeeper of Harrowden Hall beside the open door, not hidden below stairs, not arranged as decoration, but present because Marianne had requested her. The servants lined the entrance hall in quiet order. When Marianne stepped down, the housekeeper curtsied and said, "Welcome home, Your Grace." Home. The word did not seize her. It waited. Marianne looked up at the carved stone arch, the banners in Caldermere blue hanging high above the hall, the polished floor where her reflection appeared faintly beneath her hem. She had thought the colour would pain her forever after Beatrice had worn it like a theft. Instead, here among old stone and honest daylight, it looked less like a claim and more like something that could be returned to its rightful place. "Thank you, Mrs. Anstey," Marianne said. "We shall begin as we mean to continue." Alastair stood several feet behind her, bareheaded in the wind, his gloves held in one hand. He had not offered to lead her inside. He had written ahead that Harrowden Hall would receive her instructions before his. He had also written, in a separate note, that he would come only if she wished him present. Marianne had answered with 4 words, "Her Grace permits it." He had kept the paper. She knew because the edge of it showed once from the book he carried on the journey, folded with more care than a permission note deserved. Inside, Harrowden Hall adjusted to its Duchess with astonishing speed. Marianne chose the rooms to be opened, the rooms to remain closed, the accounts to be reviewed, and the small dinner to be held at the end of the week. No one asked whether His Grace approved. They already knew he had. News from London arrived in measured pieces, none long enough to make the past seem more important than the present. Lady Beatrice Lorne had been sent to a widowed aunt in Yorkshire before the season could finish speaking her name. Lady Lorne's calls were no longer returned by the houses that had once crowded her evenings. Lord Lorne's political measure failed quietly when Caldermere support vanished and 2 cautious allies discovered urgent reasons to be absent. No public ruin was announced. Society rarely admitted it had punished anyone. It simply closed doors and allowed silence to do the work. Marianne took no pleasure in Beatrice's exile, but neither did she confuse mercy with pretending harm had not been done. Clara Mills wrote from Lady Dorothea's household, her hand steadier than before, to say she had been given a place in the sewing room until a lady's maid position could be found. Lady Augusta sent a note containing only one sentence, "I hope the country air improves everyone except those who do not deserve improvement." Marianne laughed when she read it. Alastair, seated across the library table, looked up at the sound as if it had been a bird returning after winter. He did not comment. That restraint became his new form of courtship. He wrote to her even when they were under the same roof. He asked whether she wished to walk before arranging the hour. He sent the steward to her first when village petitions concerned household charity. He knocked at the east sitting room and waited for an answer every time. Once, finding her beside the portrait of his father in the long gallery, he stood beside her without speaking until she said, "Your father looks as if he expected obedience from the weather." Alastair looked at the portrait. He would have considered rain ill-bred. Marianne's mouth curved despite herself. After a moment, he added, "I learned too much from him and questioned too little. You were not a child when you married me." No, he turned his gaze from the portrait to her. That is why the fault is mine. There were no grand speeches after that. Only the silence of a man who had learned not to fill every painful place with words. At the small dinner Marianne hosted 5 nights later, she arranged the seating herself. Lady Augusta sat beside the Dowager Lady Vale, a pairing that promised either war or unexpected alliance. Lord Halberry, invited with deliberate courtesy, was placed near Lady Dorothea, who approved of him after he survived 15 minutes of questioning about widows' funds, opera subscriptions, and whether he possessed any foolish nephews. Alastair's card stood opposite Marianne's, not beside her. He noticed, bowed his head once, and took the place she had given him. During the fish course, Lady Augusta leaned toward the Dowager and said, "Your son is improving." "I dislike being forced to update my opinions." The Dowager answered, "I have found it painful as well." Marianne heard them and lowered her eyes to hide a smile. Across the table, Alastair saw the smile and did not try to claim it. That, more than anything, made it linger. After dinner, when the guests had withdrawn and the house settled into the deep quiet of the country, Marianne returned to her sitting room and found no flowers, no jewels, no apology arranged to demand admiration. Only a note on her desk. "I noticed you chose every seat tonight with care." No one looked diminished by where they were placed. "I am learning from you." She read it twice and placed it not with the evidence from London, but in the drawer where she kept useful things. The torn place card lay there as well, wrapped in the same handkerchief from Lady Augusta's house. She had not destroyed it. Not because she cherished pain, but because forgetting too quickly could become another kind of politeness. On the 7th morning, rain returned. It softened the lawns and tapped gently at the breakfast room windows. Marianne entered expecting solitude and found a small table set for 2 near the fire. No servants lingered. No elaborate display waited. Only 2 handwritten place cards stood beside the china. Marianne. Alastair. The names were written in his hand, careful but not ornate. Alastair stood when she entered. "I can have them removed," he said at once. "I didn't mean to presume." Marianne looked at the cards. Her own name appeared without title, without injury, without reduction. His name stood across from it, not demanding, only offered. "Why did you write them?" "Because the first card took something from you in public." He touched the back of the chair but did not pull it out. "I wanted these to offer one thing back in private. You don't have to sit here. You don't have to use that name. You don't have to give me mine." The rain filled the pause between them. Marianne crossed to the sideboard drawer where she had placed the old card the previous night. She took it out, unfolded the handkerchief, and set the torn place card on the table between the 2 new ones. The damaged edge looked almost fragile now. Not harmless. Never harmless. But no longer powerful enough to decide the room. Alastair looked at it, then at her. "I hate that I did not stand soon enough." "So do I." The honesty settled without cruelty. She sat, and after one careful breath, he sat across from her. No applause. No witnesses. No society to correct. Only 2 people and the space left after pride had done its damage. Marianne rested her hand beside the torn card. "I will not promise that hurt will vanish because justice was done. I don't ask that. I will not be grateful for respect I should always have had. You shouldn't be. If I stay, it will not be because you made leaving impossible." His eyes held hers. "Then I will spend the rest of my life making staying a choice worthy of you." A lesser answer would have asked to be believed. This one simply accepted the work. Marianne looked at the 2 new cards again. The old one had said her grace and still tried to make her invisible. The new one said only Marianne and left her fully seen. She lifted her gaze. "Alastair." He went very still. The name did not heal him. It changed him. She saw that at once. Whatever man had failed to rise quickly enough at Lorne House did not return in that breakfast room. Something quieter took his place, something humbled and awake. "Marianne," he said, and the word sounded nothing like possession. It sounded like thanks he knew better than to speak aloud. Outside, rain washed the Derbyshire windows. Inside, the torn card lay beside the two new ones, no longer the proof of where she had been put, but the memory of where she refused to remain. The place cards stood side by side at Harrowden Hall because no hostess had arranged them, no ambition had stolen them, and no silence had been mistaken for consent. They remained because Marianne chose her seat, and Alastair, at last, understood the honour of being invited to the table.